Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Tara Van Cleve, and I am a marketing event manager for the Developer Initiative here at Oracle. Thank you for joining us today at the Get Started with Oracle Cloud Infrastructure Core Services Developer Lab. We're excited to explore networking, compute, storage, and more with you. If you have any questions during the lab, please ask them in the Q&A area, and we'll have a solution expert available to answer them throughout the session. This lab is being recorded, and the recording link will be available on the event page and also sent to you via email shortly after the event concludes. You will also have the opportunity to participate in a short quiz on the material covered in today's lab. Upon completing the quiz, you'll receive a Developer Masterclass badge that you can share to your social media, recognizing your commitment and earned expertise. Today's lab will be presented by Orlando Gentil, Principal Training Lead and Evangelist at Oracle University Global Products and Services. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Orlando.
Thank you, Tara. It's very nice to have all that people here today are interested in learning more about OCI. The presentation today, we are going to go through some brief concepts on OCI so you guys can have an idea. And we're going to also move to what we call live labs, where you're going to have some hands-on experience on how to start working with OCI. It will be basic products that we're going to look for, but they are the core products. And from there, I think that will be your first step on or your journey on OCI. We have the link here if you didn't sign up for your trial. When you sign up for this trial account, you're going to have what we call always free, that you have services that we're going to be used. You can use forever. There's no charge at all. You don't have to worry about being charged. There's never will be a bill for you. And if you use this code, you're going to, it won't request you for a credit card. If you upgrade your account, you're going to have the 30-day free trial that's going to give you, depending sometimes, depending on the event, could be $300 or $500 in credits that you can use for the first 30 days if you want to explore additional services without an additional cost for you. After 30 days, you're going to have to start paying for those services. We have our safe harbor statement. I have to leave it for a couple seconds here on the screen for legal reasons. Just to make sure that we are doing everything according as our legal department asks us to do. And let's start talking about OCI. OCI, we have what we call, or OCI stands for Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. Within Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, we have to spread infrastructure around the world so the services can be available wherever it's closer to our customers. So we have what we call regions. Within the regions, we can have availability domains that are separated areas inside each region. Some regions will have multiple availability domains. Some regions will have just one availability domain. And inside each availability domain, we have fault domains. If you're coming from the data center world, it would be like a data center zone. The availability domains, they are separated from each other physically. They are different buildings. They are spread apart. They have redundant connections between them. And in the event of one of the availability domains fail, the other two, or as many as they have on that region, they keep working without intervention. One thing that it's important to notice is that when you subscribe to an account, you have home region. That's where mainly your resources are going to be created. So when you sign up here, I'm going to be alternating the screen so you guys can see. You have this list of regions here, and I have my home region designed, so assigned. Whenever you create an account, you're going to have to specify what's going to be the region, and by default, your resource is going to be created there. So Default domains, as I was explaining, is they are a zone on the data center. They have different secrets of air conditioning, network, top of the rack switches, and all the racks. They're all separated. So whenever you have to do a maintenance on the data center, you can move from one fault domain to the other without having any impact in your application. One thing that it's kind of interesting and important to know on OCI, it's how the identity is managed. So we're gonna have we have the key terms here: user, resources, groups. The most important one that we have to be aware now, it's compartments and the users. The users, because you're gonna have to log in the account. You guys might have already created, and compartments, because compartments, they are the cornerstone for the organization. How you want to organize your resources within OCI. Here, there's a brief description on how those concepts relate. You have the users. The users are going to be tied to groups. You can assign policies to those groups. Those policies are going to define what you're going to do with the resources, and the compartment is going to tell where those resources are going to be located. We have the instructions on the labs that we're going to be following today. We have a brief introduction here. Most of the stuff that I told you guys, it's already here on this overview as well. You're going to have the instructions here on how to create your account. If you have any doubts on how to proceed. And with further ado, let's go with the first step here. OCI gives you something that is called Cloud Shell. I'm going to start showing Cloud Shell for you because the very first thing that we're going to do is to create the first lab that we have is on how to create SSH keys. SSH keys are important because if you're going to access your Linux instances, you have to have SSH keys. Passwords are not accepted as an authentication method because people can brute force and break into your instance. First time you log in, it takes a few minutes to start. And here on Cloud Shell, we have a Linux prompt. This is a volatile machine. It runs as you click on the button here to start. And when you leave, the information is saved, but the machine does not persist. You don't have any control of this here. You just have access to the data that you save here. Following the instructions, you're going to find here what is Cloud Shell, how to access Cloud Shell, and how to create the public key. I'm going to be jumping from one screen from the instructions in the other. To create the private key, I'm going to have to create a SSH directory. I'm going to change the permissions on this directory because it's going to have sensitive information and is a good practice. You can copy the information also from here as well. If you press copy button, it's going to copy the whole instructions, or if you want to select just the command that you want, you can copy. You can protect your passphrase. You can protect your private key using a passphrase. It depends on how much security do you want. I won't enter any password here. This is the output of the random stuff that it's generated in the background in order to create the key. And we're going to have two files. One is your private key, and you have the public key. as we are using asymmetrical keys, you send your public key to the who is going to authenticate you, and you use the private key when you're going to request authentication. Never share your private key. Anytime you need to authenticate or to share something with someone, always share the public key. Private key, as the name says, it's private, it's just yours. You don't have to send it to anyone. I'm going to click here just to mark the next lab. Most of the labs, they're going to have a tiny video on the beginning of the session to remind you of the concepts and give you some brief explanation. So it's you can always refer to that as well. The documentation for OCI, it's very extensive. It also has plenty of examples on how to do the operations that we have to perform on a daily basis. The most common ones, they are already there. Let's go back to our presentation here, because we were talking about the concepts, how they relate. In our next lab, it's going to be based on compartments. What are compartments? Compartments, it's just a logical container that we create on OCI. It has nothing to do with the physical location of anything, but it has everything to do on how you are going to group those resources. Why that is important? Because it will define the permissions, and on top of permissions, there's also, you can define costs. You can use to organize, it can mimic your organization tree. Your tree, let's see, I got reversed. The organizational tree that you have in your company. Each resource, it's associated with a compartment. It cannot belong to two places. How the resources interact. As I was saying, the compartment, it's just to organize stuff. It does not prevent resources from existing in one compartment to accessing the other. Here in the image, we say a compartment A, where you have the virtual cloud network, and you have compartment B with the virtual machine. This virtual machine, it's going to be connected and using the virtual cloud network, although they are on different compartments. There's no limitation on how compartments are going to interact with the interconnectivity or the interaction of the resources. It's just for the management aspect of it. It's not for the operational aspect. You can move resources from one compartment to the other if you misplaced them, or if, for example, a valid use case is you can create a compartment called dev, test, and once you finish doing all the work, the validation that you have to have with that resource, you can move that resource to the final destination. That would be a compartment called production, or the name of the application. Depends on how you want to do that. Compartment, they are a global resource. It exists throughout your whole account. It doesn't matter if you are on different regions. If you are using different regions, it's going to be the same compartment. So here we have a region, FHX for Phoenix. We have IAD for its Ashburn. You're going to have instances living on different regions, but they are part of the same compartment. In the example that I gave before, we are using compartments to segregate your environment, like in test, production, QA. If you have production and you distribute that production on different regions, they can still live on the same compartment because they have the same role, the same purpose within your tenancy. Compartments can be nested. The your tenancy is the root compartment. So every time you see something called that we refer to the root compartment, it's your tenancy. Where is, to navigate the compartments, you can go on the navigation menu, identity and security. And from here, you can see. So this is my tenancy, is going to be my root compartment. Those are subcompartments that I have inside. If I click here, every resource on OCI, they have what we call OCID. This is a big number here that, and this format, it has like OCID, it's standard. You have the type of the resource, and then you have the identification. This number is going to be used when you are mapping resources. For example, if you are creating VNix, or if you try to find something, if you get this OCID here, you can just search. You can search for the OCID, and it will find, from there you can click and navigate and see the details. Let's check on what we have here. First thing that we're going to do in this compartment lab is to create a compartment. So we have here our compartments. We navigate to the compartment. We have the screen with the initial information that you have to fill. Let's go for here. Let me create a compartment. So just to recap, navigation menu, identity and security, compartments. Something that it's interesting on the mega menu here, it might not, it's not directly related, but it's good to know. It's going to list for you the recent places where you've been within the console. And if you have items that you are constantly using, you can just come on the corner here and pin that item. So whenever you have to come, you don't have to navigate all that. You can just come and select from the favorite ones. Let's create our compartment. I'm going to call you June because we are in June, and I can remember later. HOL demo compartment. If you miss something, it's going to alert you that a field is required. So you're going to have to come back and clear that. If you already have compartments, you want to create subcompartments, and you can navigate here. So I'm going to create this inside demo. And once you create, takes a couple seconds. I come to demo, and I have my June compartment. Okay, we went on the instructions here. We created our compartment. Let's go to our next slide. Just on how things are related. As I mentioned before, compartments can be used not only for permissions, but you can set quotas and budgets. What is a good use case for this? You have a project that your interns are trying to develop, but you don't want them to bankrupt the company. So you can create a compartment called My Intern Project, and you can assign the number of resources or a certain amount of money that you want them to spend with that project. And that helps you also to, when you, if you're creating a prototype, you're going to have an idea after running for 1 day, 2 days, a week, for a certain period of time, all the resources in that compartment, how much money did they spend, and you can forecast for your CFO how much money they have to provision for you, so you don't have any surprises. Now this is for networking. So let's go back on the instructions here, so we can create the user. We're going to start by creating a group. Permissions, they are always tied, the policies. The policies, they will define the permissions that you're going to give to a certain group. Always remember that. You don't have a way to give a permission to a user. All the policies that hold the permissions, they're going to be tied to groups. In the lab here, they talk about just the simple groups. Why I calling simple groups? Because we also have dynamic groups. When you're creating a group, if you create the simple way, there's no conditions, you just create a group and you assign users to that group. When you create a dynamic group, although we're not going to cover here, but so you can have the idea of the resources that are available to you, you can create conditions that will map the users to those groups. So if the user is with a certain, if he has a certain tag, let's say you can create a tag for your network admins. So if he has the network admin tag on it, you can do that. Why would you want to do that? Oh, I can just create a group called network admins. But what if you have a super developer that you trust him to manage the network assets, but you don't want him to be in that group? What you can do is you just create a tag and you say, hey, if this user has this network admin tag, he automatically becomes a network admin. So it can give you, as the name says, dynamic groups that gives you makes things more fluid on how you are going to organize. Let's demo here how to create a group. If you guys are following the instructions, always go to the navigation menu. If you have been on previous presentations, some people call it navigation menu, some people call hamburger menu. I would like to stick with the navigation menu, but don't feel, eventually you might hear people saying hamburger menu. Let's go on the group. What do we have here on the instructions? We're going to call OCI group. Groups, they are global resources. They exist regardless of the region. We were talking about tags, and I ended up not showing that for you guys. So every time you create a resource, the tags are going to be under the advanced options. So you're going to have two types of tags here. And you just create the name of the tag and you create the value. So the tag, for the example that we were talking, could be additional groups. And then the value here would be network admins. Or if you want to, along with compartments, tags can also be used for cost tracking. So you can create one tag that it's going to be the name of the project, and here a tag called project, and the value will be the name of the project. So with that, you can also help you track where the resources are being allocated. Let me minimize this guy here. Why we are not using. So we created our OCI group. The group is listed. And the next step, we're going to create a policy. So the policy, it holds the permissions that's going to be assigned to certain users. Ideally, you want to create the policies on the root compartment, because by doing that, they will be inherited throughout the other compartments. You can create policies here on different levels, but that can create some sort of confusion on how those policies are going to be applied. Let's go back to the instructions. We're going to create specifically inside of the demo compartment. Unique name for the policy. I'm going to copy this statement. You have some common policies here, but in this case, we're going to use the manual editor. We're going to paste what we copied from the instructions. As we created the group with OCI group, we have to use the same group here. This also could be the group ID of the group, if you want to be very specific and by any chance someone changes the name and ends up messing the policy, you can tie them to the unique ID. So you have allow, you have who, what they can do, and where they can do something. This could be compartment, this could be, excuse me, this could be in tenancy if you want to give permissions to be tenancy-wide. Permissions, you can use tenancy. You can also use here, as I was discussing previously with the tags, you can say, hey, if who I defined here has a certain tag, they can do that. Or you can use also tags to determine that they can manage some resources that are on a specific region, for example. You have a multiple team, you have a team of network admins that they are spread on different geographical locations, and you want the guys from the US to manage just the networks that are over here, and the guys over Europe to manage the networks that are over there. You can tie them to their specific regions. So you're going to have different silos and avoid people from stepping on each other's toes. As I showed you before, everything has the option to put tags here that you can use. We don't have use for tags at the moment here. We're going to create our policy. We are going to create a user now. So in the instructions, they are going to come over here to the navigation menu, but I think it's also important to tell you that you can navigate here on the breadcrumb that it's left here. So users are inside of identity. So if I just clicking by identity here, I go back to this menu and I can create the user from here. So we're going to create user 1. I'm not that creative, so I'm just sticking with something just to keep that. Email is optional. Why is important to have an email? So the user doesn't not gonna bother the administrator if they have to recover the password. If they don't fill the email here, they're gonna have to bother for one of the admins to come and make changes on the password in case they forget. We create the user. We're gonna have all the details here. The initial password, you have to set the initial password for the user. Create and reset password is gonna create for you. You need to copy this password. Let me bring my notepad here. Because as the warning says, it won't be shown again. If you don't copy the password, you're gonna have to reset again. Should not be a problem because you can do that as many times as you want, but there are other dialogues where you have to have the same procedure that if you dismiss the screen, it won't be able to get again. You're gonna have to recover. I'm gonna close here. What do they recommend us to do? We're gonna have to sign out, and after signing out, log in with the test user. Let's do that. If you are presented with the screen they show here, or if you are using a different browser, you're gonna have to enter the tenant's name again. It's a local user, so user 01. I have it here that I pasted. Sign in. As this is the first time that you're logging with a password that was reset, you're gonna have to go through these steps so you can change the password to match the criteria. If they match, if everything is okay, save new password. And now you are logged in here. When you click on the portrait icon here, you have your basic information. You can go to your user details. You can go to the tenancy if you have to get the information. For example, if you have to have, if you're playing with the compartments and you want to do that, to have your home region, CSI number. If you are new to Oracle, it's how you link to your support account. If you have to open a support ticket, that's how you link your OCI user account with your Oracle account. There's a shortcut to change your password. User settings, you go back here to where you were. It's the same as the user details. Let's check what's going to be the next step here. We already did this. The login, we changed the password. And it asks us to create an instance. We're going to come here. Navigation menu, compute, instances. We're going to pick a compartment. You don't have permissions to view all the resources. Contact your admin, your administrator for help. Why? Because we are not part of any group. If you are not part of any group, we don't have any policies assigned, and we don't have permission to do any operation. We should sign back with the admin account. Let me sign out. Always remember this, because you have the single sign-on that you go with Oracle Identity Services and the local user. Don't make a confusion with that, because if you try to log in with these credentials over here, it's going to fail. And it sometimes people get confused with this and prevents them from logging in. We are going to add the user to the group. So navigation menu, identity and security, users, user 01. You can click on the name of the user, or you can click on these 3 buttons here, and you can do view details. It's going to have the same effect. We have the groups that the users could be part of. It's going to bring a list for you. OCI group. Add to the group. Before we move on, so on the left side here under resources, you're going to have the API keys, auth tokens, secret keys. All these are part of the authentication methods that you can use with the user to do several operations inside OCI. So if you are using, for example, the OCI CLI, you have a command line interface that you can use to issue commands instead of navigating here through the web console. You have to have an API key. If you are developing something that you want to build into your application, you can also use the API keys. Tokens the same way, secret keys, you're going to need to use with object storage. So there's a variety of items here that all tied to the different authentication methods that you can play with that user. Let's check what's the next step. And we're going to have to log back with the admin user, with the user 01, sorry. And we're going to try to create an instance again. Remember that we created a policy that gave permissions to the OCI group to create things into the demo compartment. So, okay, I changed it to the demo compartment here. I already have a web server, but I created yesterday as a test and I forgot to clean it. I'm going to clean it just to show that I have the permissions to manage everything that is on this compartment. It should not be here. But now, as you can see, assigning the user to the appropriated group, I could manage resources that are within that compartment. Let's move to our next lab. That it's on virtual cloud networks. Virtual cloud networks, it's a constraint that we create to hold the network traffic within OCI. A VCN, it's a layer 3 network. It's a regional resource that you define a big block of IPs, CIDR block. And within that CIDR block, you carve small chunks that they're going to be your subnets. Subnets can be public, subnets can be private. What's the difference between a private subnet and a public subnet? They're going to be carved from the same CIDR block of private IPs that you use. But if you have a public subnet, you're going to be allowed to map public IPs to the resources that live on that public subnet. The IP is not going to be tied physically to that resource, but it will be mapped to a one-to-one net, and it will allow communication from inbound and outbound communication, respecting the security rules that you have. This picture here gives you an idea of how a VCN places inside a region, the subnets that we created. And here in the middle, it shows the gateways that we use within OCI. The internet gateway is the one that is responsible for doing the mapping that I just mentioned on the public IP that you're going to be using. So if you want to access anything over the internet that might want to access you as well, you have to use the internet gateway. If you have an instance that, for example, just needs to go outbound to the internet, but it doesn't require any traffic inbound, you have something called net gateway. It creates a multiple to one net that allows the resources here to access the internet. And we have a third gateway called service gateway. It's pretty much like the net gateway, but it's tied just to internal Oracle services. So if you want to access object storage, you go through the service gateway. Why that distinction is important? Everything that leaves the region, you're gonna be charged for the outbound charges. Anything that comes inbound, there's no charge, it's free. So if you have instances that need to access several objects on object storage, and if you're doing that through the internet gateway or through the net gateway, and you are going through the public internet, you're going to be charged for that. If you want to use, if you want to prevent that, you can use the service gateway, and that traffic is not charged. All the tenancies come with the first 10 terabytes of outbound data included. So you have plenty of data that you can transfer before you start getting charged. And the amount is kind of the price that we charge per gigabyte. It's ridiculously low. So before that, 10 terabytes, you don't have to worry. This other slide here, it has pretty much the same information that we had on the previous slide, but I wanted to include it here so you can have an idea on how you can communicate your OCI infrastructure with your on-premises. We have our gateways here. We're going to show another gateway called Dynamic Routing Gateway. That's where we're going to make connections with VPN Connect and Fast Connect. And using VPN Connect and Fast Connect, you can connect your on-premises to OCI. VPN is going to use IPsec tunnels, and Fast Connect, it's gonna give you a physical port on a switch that is connected to OCI. This physical port here that you have, you can use to connect to your on-premises through third-party providers. So your office could be using, for example, Verizon, AT&T Link to connect to OCI, and they give you a private link to do this instead of going through the tunnel. So the IPsec tunnel goes over public interface, public internet, and Fast Connect is going to be on top of private links. The biggest difference is when you're using a private link, you have better SLAs and it's predictable. So if your application requires that, you can take advantage of that. Different from other providers, This here, you pay just for the port. You don't pay for the traffic that you have. So it helps you to lower your bill in the end of the day. What we have next? The traffic on OCI, it's managed by, first, by security list. Security list is imagine that as the firewall rules that you have to manage. Security lists could be stateful or stateless. Stateful means if you create a rule that allows you to leave, automatically you have a rule that matches whatever left and allows it to come back. So you don't have to create one rule out, another rule in. That's the meaning of stateful. Stateful automatically creates a pair for you. So whatever is left, it can come back. If you made it stateless, you're going to have to make verification on two ways. Stateless are faster, but they require two rules. Stateful are, they have a toll on the processing, but it's worry-free, if you put it that way. Security lists, they are plugged to your public subnet. So when you create a security list, any resource that it's in a given subnet will obey that security list. Although it's defined on the subnet, it's enforced at the VNIC level. So if you want people to talk internally, you also have to give permission for them to do that. Just because they are on the same subnet doesn't mean that one resource can talk to the other. You have to grant permissions for that. And let's go to the next one. The second layer of security that we improve, it's the network security group. It's pretty much the same way as the security list, but the biggest difference is that it's applied on the VNIC. So you can create different groups. It's more flexible, and it allows you to create different ways to do the rules and apply in a more granular way. Let's go back to our lab here, because we're going to create a VCN now. All this explanation that I gave you, you can also follow along with this video here. To create a VCN, I think I left it from yesterday here. I have to delete. So navigation menu, networking, virtual cloud networks. What is important to note here is on the instructions, we're going to be using the wizard. The wizard gives you the option to automatically create the gateways for you that we mentioned, the internet gateway, net gateway, service gateway, and also create the basic routing rules for you to have access to the internet. So it's kind of worry-free. It's interesting if you want to do anything fast and you are okay with having those gateways. If you create using the Create VCN button, it will create just the space and will create no gateway, and you have to manually create everything. In this lab, we're going to go with the wizard. You're going to put the VCN name. On the instructions, you're going to have the parameters that we're going to use. They already come filled here. They just change a little bit. The public subnet here. You pick the name, the compartment. We're going to create a demo. Tags if you want, but we're not going to use tags. It reminds you here on the side what it comes with, the small diagram. When we click on next, it's going to show summary of what we're going to do. And when we go with create, you have the progress here. Compute. Compute instances are how computers are represented on OCI. Computers can be virtual machines that will be virtualized computers that will be created within a bigger host, or we can have bare metal servers where you're going to have access to a full box, a full computer with all the resources, and it's not shared, but it's dynamically provisioned the same way that it would be created with you. Why would you want a bare metal server? Sometimes surprisingly, we have users that they want to have the whole machine for them because they have a huge workload to run. And sometimes for compliance reasons, they can't share. The bare metal can also be used for something that we call dedicated host, where you reserve the whole server, you allocate the whole server for you, and within that dedicated server, you carve your virtual machines. When you create a virtual machine, it will pick the first available host that it's on the list and create your virtual machine. Some industries, they have restrictions on running workloads on the same infrastructure that other where a competitor might be running. So let's say you are Coca-Cola and you want to create a virtual machine, but you don't want to use the same host as Pepsi. You're going to get a dedicated host, and with the dedicated host, you're going to create your VMs there. Those are restrictions that are imposed by some norms. The way that we implement security in OCI, no one sees what the other virtual machine is doing. There are several layers of protections that are made and how we isolate the resources. Let's create an instance so you guys can have an idea how an instance is created. On the lab here is going to be lab 4. I have to apologize myself because these screenshots are not up to date, but they are not that different from what you're going to find, and they will not preventing you from doing anything. So navigation menu, compute, instances. The terminated instance is going to show here for a day, so you have an idea of what you deleted, what you didn't delete. If you change the state here to just what is active, what is running, it will disappear, but it will clean up in a day or so. So don't worry about terminated instances. Once we click on create instance, you're going to specify the name of the instance. We're going to specify where is the compartment that we're going to use, the placement of the instance. If the region that you are using has multiple availability domains, you can choose which availability domain you're going to use. You can also specify the default domain. Usually it's best for you if you let Oracle pick for you. If you're creating a group of instances that will work for your application, the good practice asks you to put them on different fault domains. So in the event of one failing for some reason, due to infrastructure failure, the others would not be affected. You don't, that's what we call the avoiding single points of failure. When we click here on edit for the shape, change image will allow you to choose between the platform images. It's what we give as the operating systems that are available for you. So basically it's Canonical, Ubuntu, Centos, Oracle Linux, and Windows. As Windows is charged, we can't we don't give it on the always free. Within here, you can select the version if you want a specific version of that OS. And we have some builds here. If you have like a control on how to test that you have to validate each build, that can be useful for you because you can tie to a specific image build. We're going to leave the default as Oracle Linux. When you go on shape, you have the option to select if you're going to use AMD, Intel, and we recently added Ampere. And we have also the specialty shapes. For example, if you want to use GPU, if you use dense I/O, when we come to storage, we're gonna take a look at that. What is dense I/O? And as I was mentioning before, you have the always free, always mark it here on the resource that you're going to do. We have the option to give you these shapes, and you also have flexible shapes when you have a different, that they look pretty much like this. You have like 4 cores of ARM that you can play with, and 24 gigs of memory. So you can play with that. For the lab, why it's not showing here? We're going to stick with the AMD one and all that. The shapes, as I was mentioning, they're flexible. You can choose the number of CPU that you want to use, the amount of memory, and the number of VNICs is going to be proportional to the OCPU. The number of VNICs and also the bandwidth that is associated with that. The key that we created, we're going to use it here. Now it's the time. If you cat the file, oops, this is the private. We want the public key. We are going to copy this content here. If you want, you can also generate the keys here, but you're going to have to save the files here. If you have the file on your computer, you can upload from here as well. If you are injecting the keys from a different method, you can say no SSH keys here, and it should not prompt you. The instance has what we call boot volume. It's the for the hard disk that you have on your computer, the first hard drive. And you can specify the size of it if you want here. We're going to leave the default 46. It's 50 something, but usable it's 46. And we're going to keep in transit encryption, so it's a extra layer of security. And if you want to use your private keys, private encryption keys, not the ones managed by Oracle, you can specify that here as well. When you click on create, you're going to be moved to this screen here. It's going to be orange while it's provisioning. And as soon as it's ready, it's going to change to green. While we are waiting here it to be provisioned so I can demo to you, if you want to go ahead and also follow the instructions. Okay, so we have the instance that turned to green. We have the instructions here on this section of instance access. If we copy the IP here, we can come on Cloud Shell. Let me make this screen bigger because I'm going to have more instructions here. We can SSH. I'm going to use -I to specify my private key. Remember, public key, you send to others, you send to the instances, you send everywhere. Private key, it's just for you. So it's you that is authenticating to the server. So we are going to use the private key file. The user that we're going to authenticate on the instance, this user is also mentioned here. So you have the public IP and you have the username and the IP address. When you hit enter, it's going to show you the authentication of the host. Could not establish it because it's the key that they're using to the fingerprint of the key. It's not accepted yet. So here you have to type yes. It's not just the Y. You have to type, if you type the Y, it will fail. And remind you that you have to type yes. And after that, you're going to be on the prompt of the server that we just created. Let's see here what he asks us to do. We added the public key, we created the server, and now we are going to, we just connected. I show you guys how to do that. And we're going to install Apache. Apache is a web server. On Linux, you have to be root to do administrative commands like installing packages. You can become the root user or the way that is configured on OCI by default, and that's standard and pretty much we're just getting what the distros, the Linux distros show us. That if you use the sudo command, you can do the stuff that it's allowed to root. So sudo the Apache package is called HTTPD. I won't go that much on the Linux part here to save some time, but I can point you to some resources. For those interested, they can reach me and I can point some resources on how to get more, to know more a bit of Linux. First time you run anything to install, it's going to update the sources that are pre-configured on the image. And it takes some time. Let's go through the instructions here. Just to show you what they're going to do. After the installation, you have to enable the service and configure it to start at boot time. Because if you just start it and it's not enabled, if you reboot the server, it will not work. It will not come up when you, in the event of booting. Okay, it's already installed. Always using sudo because we are running as the OPC user. It started Apache. It configured it to start at at boot time. We're going to make a quick config test. Let's run the Apache config test. Syntax is okay. Service is up and running. We're going to grant access on the local firewall. On Oracle Linux, the firewall comes by default and only the SSH port is open. So we have to open the firewall to allow inbound connections to the HTTP port. After getting the rules set, we have to reload so those new rules can be applied. We're going to create a sample web page instead of using the default one that they have. we can paste this command here. It creates a web page. And after that, we should be able to access. I'm going to open a new tab here. Let me copy the IP address. We have to copy the public IP, not the private. Always the public. The private is visible just inside your VCN. It won't not be routable outside. http:// your public IP. It's taking too long. It should come back right immediately. And why that happens? When we created the instance, we just placed it on the VCN, but sorry, we placed it on the public subnet, but we didn't allow any traffic to come in. We have a security list, as you guys remember, it's tied to the subnet, and that security list allows you to some ping responses, and it allows communication on port 22. That's why we were able to use SSH to access the instance. What we have to do now is we are trying to access port 80. That's the port that is used for HTTP, and it's not allowing us. So we have to come here. We're going to have to create a rule. We won't check this. Remember the difference between stateless and stateful. We're going to allow anyone in the world to access. We're going to use a CIDR block here to do that. The protocol that we want is TCP. The destination port is the port on the server that it's listening to that. And on the description here, can be anything that helps you to understand what the rule is for. Once you apply that, you create it, pretty much is immediately applied. And now we can access the page with the text that we created for it. So with that, we installed we created an instance, we installed an HTTP server, we changed the security list for that VCN, and we were able to access it. And all these structures that all that I did, it's on the instructions here that we went through. So you can go on a slower pace and try to reproduce that. Now let's talk a little bit of block volume. Block volume is part of the storage services that we have on OCI. Instances can also take advantage of physical disks. Block volumes, we have corporate storage that we carve space for you, and you take advantage of big storage with just the space that you need. The local NVMe, they have NVMe. It's if you're familiar with solid state drives, NVMe, it's like SSD on steroids. They are much faster. They're connected directly to the board of the main board of the servers. They're extremely high performance disks. File storage is the shared storage that we have. It's if you oversimplify, it's an NFS server that you don't have to set up. You can just create a space for you. Great advantage of this is this file can be shared. It's a file share, and it can be mapped by several servers. You don't have to worry about tuning performance. You can connect multiple servers to it. It scales as you need. It shrinks as you stop using, so really flexible. And we have object storage that it's non-structured data. It's just a bunch of files that you put there and you access, and it cannot be mounted like a file system. I already told what block storage is. Persistent storage, it's going to be used, it's the boot volume, it's a type of block volume. It's very specific because it's used for boot. And you can create block volumes as additional storage. So if you are from the Windows side of things, it's like if your computer, the disk is full, you can just go to the store, buy a second hard drive, and you put this as a D drive. This is just an example, because on OCI, something that you can do is you can expand the disk. If the disk is full, you can go there and say, hey, I want to allocate more space, and do that. Sometimes you want to have a separated disk. You can also create one, like on the example of the D drive that I used. Block volume comes in 3 tiers. Actually, it's 4 tiers nowadays, because we have ultra high performance. We have basic, that it's very, the number of IOPS, it's limited. And it's good when you have like a huge files, but you don't have a lot of operations going on. It reduces the price. Balanced, it's when you have more flexibility for normal operations. Higher performance is when you have IO intensive workloads. And with ultra high performance, you have even more IOPS. And all this you can play, it's just a slide that you select on the control panel. The disks are independent. You can create and attach as many disks as you, not as you want. You have a limit on the amount of disks that you can attach to the server, but you can add 32 block volumes if you need to expand, or if you need to combine disks on different ways. And when you delete the instance, you have the option to preserve those disks. So you are saving the data, and you can reuse the whole disk on a new instance if you need. Let's take a look on how to create a block volume. Let's go to Lab 5. Navigation menu, storage, block volume. The same way that instances are tied to the availability domain, block volumes, they are on the same way. So when you create a block volume, if you want to attach it to a particular instance, we don't get this. You have to remember where your instance is. How do you do that? Let me go back here. My instance here, the one that is running, if you look here on this column, availability domain, AD3. So when I'm going to create my volume here, I have to go to AD3. Otherwise, you won't be able to map to that specific instance. We're going to use the default volume size. If you go to custom, you can go all the way to 32 terabytes. If you want to change the performance, as I mentioned to you, lower cost, balanced, high performance, ultra high performance, and you can go all the way to an insane amount of IOPS. Backup policy, by default, we come with no default policy selected. We come with 3 predefined policies. You can define the policies as at will. You can create different policies that will match your custom needs, or you can take advantage of one that is pre-configured. Cross-region replication, it's when you select this, as I don't have another region subscribed, but when you subscribe to another region, you have the ability to replicate this disk to a different region. So if you have business that are on both sides of the Atlantic, and for you imagine, oh, someday it will never happen. No one's going to cut the cable between the US and Europe, but someone messed up and cut the fiber. You can have the data replicated over Europe for that. I'm being very dramatic on the example, but you get the idea. And with that, let's create our block volume. What are the instructions that they say here? The parameters that we used. And we have to wait until it provisions. So the block volume can be attached in two ways to the instance. It can be iSCSI or paravirtualized. iSCSI is a protocol that uses a network to connect to the disk. And you have to run several commands, as we are going to see on the instructions here, to do that. It gives a slightly better performance. And paravirtualized is you don't have to run any commands. It's mapped through the hypervisor level. And it's very interesting to use paravirtualized when you are working with DevOps and you have to automate the creation of images and adding the disks and all that. That simplifies the process for you. You can do DevOps with iSCSI? Yes, you can. But as you have to run the commands inside of at the OS level, it might add some complexity that you don't want. You just have to wait how much performance you're looking for versus the simplicity that you're going to have on your operations. The type of access, you can share a disk with multiple servers. This is useful, for example, if you're doing a cluster and you have to make like a shared space where they're going to save the state of the cluster. That would be one of use case where you can use it as a shared disk. We're going to select the instance. If, for example, you created, you didn't pay attention on the availability domain, and you were selected a different one, when you click here on this box, you won't be able to see the instance where you want to attach. If you have some specific way that you want to specify the device, you can choose here. But if you don't want, you can just leave empty and you go with attach. It gives you a reminder that if you are using iSCSI, you have to run certain commands. These commands, no reason for panic. You can click here. When it's attached, this is going to become available and it's going to show you the commands that you have to run on the instance. We already have the instance. Okay, it's attached here. Now we have the iSCSI commands that we need. We can just copy those commands. I'm just listing the disks here before running the commands. I'm going to paste the commands here. And if I list the disks now, here I only had SDA. here I have SDA and SDB with the 50 gigabytes disk that I just created. Our work is not done because after doing that, it's time to get the to mount the disk. But okay, here I have to create a partition, and after creating the partition, I have to mount to create the file system. After that, I should be able to mount the disk. So SDB. I'm not root. So sudo. I already pointed what is the disk. If I do a P, I don't have any partitions. And for a new partition, primary partition, partition number 1. The first sector going to be the default. I'm going to use the whole disk, so it's going to be the last one. P, I can show the partition that I just created. W to write it, and the disk should have the partition created. If we list again, we have the partition that we just created. We are going to create a directory. For the directory that we create, it's where we're going to mount the disk. No, before that, we have to create the file system. For SDB1. Again, I need to be root to do that. And now mount dev SDB1 /mnt sudo Now, if we look here, we have our mounted disk. And that should finish this lab. Guys, we are really beyond what we planned. I think we're gonna have to go short on the object storage, but object storage, it's a quick lab that should make you guys should break no sweat on finishing it. And the instructions are here. So moving to the closing. So this is part of the links. You don't have to memorize. We're going to send you all this presentation. We have another. Tara, I think you can talk about this better than me.
Yes. Thank you, Orlando, for that great presentation. I will just get through these very quickly in the interest of time. But this is one of our upcoming events on August 3rd, and it involves technical sessions, hands-on labs, demos, panels, and a live Q&A with experts on the subject of simplifying modern app dev. So we have that link there. And then if you go to the next slide, as I mentioned in the very beginning briefly, we do have a quiz that is on what we covered today in today's workshop. So after completing the quiz and to recognize your commitment and earn expertise, you'll have the chance to earn a developer masterclass badge, and you can share that to your social media. And so each session in this masterclass series will have its own badge and lead up to the eventual title of Developer Pioneers. Thanks for spending your time here with us, and we hope to see you again next time.